Hey everybody, welcome to another episode on IronmanHacks. Today I'm really happy to be speaking with Dr. Jeffrey Durmer, who is a sleep expert, physician, medical doctor, as well as he worked with the US Olympic weightlifting team, all about sleep. Maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you've done.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me here, first of all. It's always good to talk to a new audience, and triathlon athletes are a sort of a new audience for me in some ways, but definitely talk to a lot of distance athletes. So this is a great avenue. So my background, I'm a neurologist. That's my MD side. And I'm a neuroscientist. That's my PhD side. And worked in academics for most of my career in major universities like University of Pennsylvania, Emory University. And I actually started recognizing through my research in looking at the functions of sleep and wake in the brain of animals, that this is something that we could directly apply to humans. And there's a lot of data and has been a lot of research over the last 100 years in the sleep and circadian neurobiology realm. So my job as an MD PhD is to take things and translate them into practice. It's the bench to bedside construct. And that's what I started doing in my academic work, looking at folks that had sleep disorders like restless leg syndrome and sleep disordered breathing, a number of conditions, but then also looking at performance and the changes in cognitive ability as well as physical ability. And personally, as an athlete myself, I mean, I grew up as an athlete my whole life and actually went to D1 schools on scholarships for things like rowing, and then became a more of a national team rower after college. It really appealed to me that there must be a significant physical benefit to sleep, or we wouldn't be doing it every night as a species, and all these other species that sleep. And so far, we haven't found one that doesn't, by the way, including trees, including plants. They all have what we call quiescent periods. That must be some sort of an advantage to us physically, mentally, emotionally. And so I started studying the impact of sleep loss and sleep deprivation. And lo and behold, there's just wasn't much data about what the impact was on athletes in particular. And that really started my interest in that area and working with athletes. And while I was at Emory University, I had the opportunity to work with the Atlanta Falcons professional football team here in the US, and also with a number of other elite athletes in the swimming realm. My kids were all D1 swimmers and were on national teams and things in their days, and actually realized that a lot of their problems were related to their early wake up times and going to school and then having second practices in the afternoons and being sleep deprived. And so I worked with the coaches in the Dynamo Swim program in Atlanta, where we lived at the time, to really improve some of those metrics around sleep and wake. And lo and behold, we saw significant benefits, not just in the pool, but also in behaviors in high school kids, which was a major benefit. So it really got me interested in applying what we knew from the science into populations like athletes. And in the last few years, last 3 or 4 years now, I've been working with the US Olympic team, in particular the weightlifting team that brought me in to help organize travel, but also to organize training programs that would accentuate wake-based performance drive within the brain and bodies of Olympic level athletes. And what we did this last year with the Olympics in Tokyo, and all the restrictions and limitations around being in Tokyo. In fact, they couldn't get into Tokyo. They couldn't stay in Tokyo after their games were done for 2 days. But also training in Tokyo was quite difficult. We actually developed a training camp in Honolulu, Hawaii, which was pretty much halfway between most of the United States and Tokyo, 5 hours from Tokyo, and around 5 to 8 hours in the US, depending on time zone. It allowed us to create a camp where we could do circadian modulation to get people used to where they're going in Tokyo, as well as to extend their sleep and allow them to get the performance benefits of extended sleep, as well as circadian timing adjustment. As soon as they got into country, 2, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days before their event, they were already on Tokyo time. They were already training, eating, sleeping, and living on Tokyo time, which in Hawaii is very late. So having breakfast at 10 o'clock in the morning, your first workout of the day is at noon, your lunch is at 4 or 5, and then your workout in the evening ends at 9, and you have dinner between 9 and 11. So sounds really odd, sounds really off, especially, oh my God, I'm going to the Olympics. Why am I sleeping off my time? You're not. You're actually sleeping where you're going to be performing. And that's a concept that a lot of athletes could benefit from, and something that we develop based on the basic science and the data that we're getting from clinical real world studies with athletes in different sports. So I got interested from my natural interest in sports and the combination of science and sleep.
That's really exciting stuff, because it's, being applied at the most elite level possible. And I guess with triathletes, you mentioned you've done some triathlon yourself, maybe back in the 80s.
Yeah, back in the 80s. This gray beard is a real gray beard. It's not fake. Yeah, no, back in the day, after my rowing career, a lot of us rowers were just like, we're very much distance athletes. And so we all ran, we all had bikes, didn't know what to do with them. And we all could swim because, if you follow the boat and drown, it's not good. So we all had some swimming background. A lot of us were actually swimmers as well. And so we kind of naturally gravitated into the sport back in the 80s when it really wasn't as much of a sport as it is now. But certainly,
brand new.
Everybody knew about the triathlons in Hawaii, but that was about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a whole bunch of rowers, professional rowers and Olympic level or national level rowers become triathletes. The most famous is Cam Wurf, who's like the best, one of the best, you know him, right? And then there's a new German guy who just came up, a new French guy, a few other people I've seen who are all rowers. It's pretty cool. But anyway, back to triathletes. I think the typical situation, which is most triathletes, they're training 15 hours, 20 hours a week, maybe training really hard. And in a sport where, intensity and pain is recognized as, it's how painful was it? That's the metric for how good it was, right? And you can make it even more painful if you don't sleep. And if you wake up at 4 o'clock and you do everything and you go to sleep late, you do everything in the day, then you have your real job. And, I succumbed to this trap myself in 2019, where I was waking up at 4:20, doing an hour and a half workout, coming in back home, taking my daughter to school, going to my office, going, to swim squat at 7 p.m., not getting home till 9 o'clock, going to sleep at 9. And then it was just killing me. And I was really burning the candle from both ends. But I was doing all my workouts. I was meeting all my coach's plans. I was doing everything he had said. So that must mean it's the right way. Wasn't I right or was I wrong?
Yeah, of course. Well, your coach said so, so it must be right. Here's the problem that we have. And it's actually a cultural problem. It's not just a triathlete's problem. A lot of sports have this problem, and our culture is the reason. That you just look over the last 60 years, if you go back to the 1960s, there were businesses that were called something like 7-Eleven, which I think some of us probably know. Well, the reason it was called 7-Eleven is it opened at 7 a.m. and it closed at 11 o'clock at night. My grandparents were horrified by this concept. They're like, what are you talking about? Up to 11 o'clock at night? People should not be in stores at 11 o'clock at night. And that was their era, their thought process, that's absolutely wrong. That business will fail. Well, let's wind forward. What happened, probably in the 80s is when it really occurred. We became addicted to this ability to see things in the middle of the night with artificial light that were only available to us previously during the day. And it became an advantage, and businesses thought of it as an advantage. So the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shift concept started really in earnest after the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And productivity, went up and everything went up. But what actually happened is we put people, us, into competition with our own circadian rhythm for sleep and wake. And it's driven up a huge problem within our country. Culturally, we don't actually look at sleep as an important element of our day-to-day existence. and we've undervalued it. In fact, so much so that now our kids are the most sleep deprived individuals anywhere on the planet. If you look at what the CDC has done for a number of years following the public health issues of sleep, they found that actually 67% of high school kids, so that 13 to 18-year-old range of kids, 66% are not even getting enough sleep time. That's not to say that they're sleeping at the right time or that they're getting quality sleep. It's just that their duration of sleep is not adequate for them, for their growth. That's a huge problem, because I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, but our parents would say, sleep, you need at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep. You need to be in bed. You need to sleep. It was a big deal. Now it's more like, you need to get that violin lesson in so that I can get you into an academically challenging school, or you need to take that extra course at night so that we can compete. We've lost sight of the importance of sleep in our natural development. And it's actually leading to disease. And it's leading to a lot of problems in our culture. The rise of diabetes, obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular disease are all directly tied. I provide these lectures to a lot of different groups. And there's a really interesting slide in those lectures where, as you see the amount of the duration of sleep time going down from an average of around 8.1 hours in the 60s for an adult in this country to 6.1 hours, which it is now on average for an adult. That 2-hour drop in that 60-year time span corresponds with the rise in diabetes and obesity. You see them overlap each other in the 1980s. And that's exactly when a lot of the culture change and the devaluation of sleep occurred. So triathletes are in the culture. You're in the culture of this Western, don't think sleep's important. And so, of course, it's not important. It's not part of your training plan. Your coaches don't talk about it probably. And that's why we need to talk about it, because sleep is a part of your training. It's how you recover. And so think of it that way.
It's like
all those drinks and things and powders. Yeah.
That extra, 1 hour workout I did may have been better served in a sleep state. Like I may have been recovering from my other workouts and improving. I mean, that's what the training stimulus does, right? It creates that adaptation. How do you adapt?
So that one of the things that is really clear from all the basic biology around sleep, and this has actually been shown in athletic populations, all different kinds of athletes, that the growth hormone that you need to create, that you actually do workouts for. You do growth hormone workouts, guys. Or anaerobic threshold workouts. They drive growth hormone production. Guess when you make the growth hormone? It's not after the workout. That's not when it happens. It happens in deep non-REM sleep. Right. So what you are trying to do is create a stimulus, as you call it, exactly right, that creates a drive for deeper non-REM sleep and more of it so that you can make more growth hormone. And that is what actually recovers your body and recovers your muscles and recovers your nervous system. You repackage neurochemicals that way.
But I need to wake up early for my next workout, though. It's like I'm spending money before I'm faster than I can earn it, basically. If that's what I'm doing.
You're not getting the benefit of your own training. And this is the concept of overtraining. So this is something I learned the hard way as a rower. My coach in college actually looked at me. I was running on weekends. So we'd row, twice a day, mainly in season, and out of season, we'd even have doubles. But that was not the difficulty, because we could work around schedules, and we'd have some days we were singles and we're lighter load versus heavier, depending on your type of workout. But on the weekends, we'd have our races on Saturdays, and you're supposed to be off on Sunday. And the idea of being off was, active recovery, stretching, yoga, something like that. We didn't have that back in the 80s. We didn't know about yoga as much as we do now. We didn't know about active recovery. So my active recovery was I went on 15-mile runs. And I loved going on long runs. And it was like a fun thing to do, to go for a 15-mile run. It was a quarry run I used to do. And a buddy would come sometimes, or I'd just do it by myself. My coach found out about this and almost threw me out of my boat. He's like, you are overtraining. You could be so much faster. You could be so much more useful to us if you would just not overtrain. And it was the first time I really heard a coach say that. And he was a coach. Bert Applebaum is his name. Bert's a great coach. Bert actually looked at the basic physiology of us as individuals and try to get through to us that, sleep. He didn't know anything about sleep. He wasn't a scientist. Sleep is actually what is going to make you faster, not just the training. The training is important. The sleep is how you actually recover so you can be faster the next day. All the weightlifters know that. Their weightlifting gets better when they sleep more. In fact, it's not just the physical response, it's the physical and emotional and psychological response. One of the things that's been shown from a lot of the more recent data, and this is something in weightlifting athletes in particular that I can reference, is that when people got enough sleep and adequate sleep, or even a little more than adequate, we call sleep banking, they not only had more physical recovery, and you could do those metrics in terms of VO2, or you can do it from blood lactate, all kinds of different metrics. They also had a perception index that changed dramatically. And what I mean by perception is, how hard was that lift? How hard was that run? How difficult was that swim? The perception index was the thing that changed most dramatically. That
I see.
Even
so mentally they felt that they perceived it, the rate of perceived exertion went down.
Exactly. So much lower. In fact, you see in a study that looked at recovery of sleep versus people not recovering sleep properly over the course of 2 months. And this is in weightlifters, but also in runners, and it's been seen in cyclists too. The perception of their effort became a mismatch with their performance. So in other words, that state that we all like to get to where you're running and it just feels like it's flowing. You're in that
just flow. Yeah.
The flow construct. The flow construct is supported by sleep. To get that flow, to get that feeling of less exertion and more performance, all these studies are showing is that you just have to extend the amount of sleep you get, and you actually reduce the training burden to match the sleep time. And by that, I mean, if you're working out, there's something that we use, something called metabolic equivalence. If you're doing a sport like bowling, where the metabolic equivalents are lower than a sport like triathlon or rowing or boxing, where it's quite high, the amount of sleep you need to generate the growth hormone and the other anti-inflammatory hormones called cytokines that occur at night is hours of difference. So the average person needs 7.5 hours. That's kind of the average we see. That's an average. You can go, some people are 6.5 hours, some people are 9.5 hours. That's the range. Less than 6.5, I don't believe you. And it's more than 9.5, there's a problem. So in that realm of sort of sleep times, you'll find people that, typically you'd sleep 7 hours, say. But if you went for a 15-mile run that day, you're going to need 8 hours to recover based on the metabolic output you just created. That actually has to be replaced at night. Repackage neurochemicals in your brain, repackage glucose, and actually make insulin and all the other things that have to occur at night. That actually is why you need more time in terms of your normal sleep. Now, when you talk about competition, it's even more. You need 2 hours for some sports, like triathlon. You need at least 2 hours over the normal non-athletic, what we call NARPs, non-athletic regular people. So you really have to look at this as a part of your training, and it needs to be scheduled. And that would be the thing I would tell all athletes, whether they're competitive, just starting, you've got to schedule sleep as part of your training. If you leave it out,
basically what we need to do is we need our coaches and we need our mentors to tell us this. I think they don't prioritize sleep in a way that nobody does, the sleep machismo thing. Right? So because triathletes use a certain software generally called Training Peaks. Maybe you've heard of it. It's from Boulder. And you get a green square. Right. So you get a green square for every workout you complete, swim, bike, run within the prescribed time or effort or whatever. Now they need one for sleep. So it's like, did you get X number of hours of sleep last night? And either you did or you didn't. And then if you get that green square, you will do it. So that's sort of
You need to have it as part of, as you're saying, your training. And one of the things, so one of the first groups I really, not one of the first groups, but one of the groups I worked with were CrossFit athletes and competitive CrossFit athletes, overlapping with weightlifting and overlapping with powerlifting. And the one thing that I think changed a lot of people's minds is we did a month-long challenge, which was I want you to write down your workouts, as you always do. Write down what you eat, doesn't have to be too detailed, and write down exactly how many hours of sleep you get. And we gave points for your workout, completing your workout, just like the app would do, for healthy choices in terms of food and recovery foods, and also reducing things like alcohol and caffeine. And we gave you points, or took away points, for sleep time. And if you didn't get, on average, a sleep time that matched what you said your average need was. And that's something that I think it was more educational about. The sleep part was something that nobody had thought about, that none of them had conceived of before. And the folks that actually paid attention to the sleep component in and of itself as the most important component, the other two components fell in line. So as soon as they started getting enough sleep, their workouts were easier. They showed up to every workout. They were making better choices with their food. And the fundamental lesson was that sleep is the foundation for all those other behaviors. If your sleep isn't good, your choices are going to be poor. You're going to make erroneous
It's just a hierarchy
choices.
It's
Maslow. It's the Maslow
exactly.
pyramid. Been proven wrong by many psychologists, but nonetheless, a useful anagram or construct. The idea that at the bottom of that pyramid, you've got things like eating and sleeping, and all the things that you need, like shelter. But if we look physiologically at our bodies and why we sleep every night, and all these species on Earth have this, we need it for function. In fact, there are a lot of experiments that we did back, probably not good experiments for animals, that were done back in the 70s and 80s in Germany, that actually demonstrated that if you sleep deprive an animal for up to about 2 weeks, and these were done with rats, they die. And they die of things like overwhelming sepsis. They die of cardiovascular collapse because they lose the ability to keep their natural sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems intact. So overwhelming sepsis, immune dysfunction is one of the first things you find. And if you realize that sleep itself keeps you healthy, you won't get sick, which is another problem that athletes who do distance often have, is that they show up sick to a competition because of the overtraining that they've incurred. That's something you can actually remedy for yourself just by adding sleep and noticing.
And it's so easy. I mean, it's not painful like a intense workout, or it doesn't require that mental exertion, or exactly. You don't stress out like, oh no, I have to sleep. How am I going to do it?
But it takes self-discipline, and especially in this culture where we don't value it, and instead we value being on our phones, or value being on the computer, or value other things, driving our kids to the sixth lesson of the night, things like that. We have to sort of reduce a little bit to actually gain the benefit of what we're doing for ourselves. That self-discipline is hard, and you need reinforcement, which is why we did it as a group for that, in that CrossFit example, for the month, because it really took a group effort and a little bit of sort of sleep shaming, we call it, which is the opposite of the machismo, the sleep shaming. You didn't, like, if I had people that show up to work and they said, hey, I pulled an all-nighter, it's a sleep shaming opportunity, and say, well, that's not a good idea. You're not on your best performance then. Go home and sleep. I'm not going to have you work like that. That's not right. It's opposite of what we get taught as physicians, to be perfectly honest with you. Stay up all night. Nurses stay up all night. Police officers stay up all night. It's not good for us. There are certain jobs that we have to have that, but there are smarter ways to do it.
But those guys can also sleep too, right? I mean, maybe they take a night shift, but presumably they get time to sleep. I would hope.
You'd be surprised by the research.
Not necessarily. Okay.
Okay. We're killing our frontline folks in a way that they don't need that added problem.
Right.
So that's a cultural issue, though, and also a
Gosh.
machismo too. So, but for
Even
all the athletes
even
out there, this is actually I'm sure a lot of you guys also travel, and that's
yeah.
another major issue that impacts your sleep and your performance. And as I mentioned earlier about the Hawaii camp we built for the Olympic team, you have to think ahead like that. You have to put yourself in the place and time of your performance and work backwards to determine what you need to do now to prepare for that change, and how quickly are you going to adapt. Honestly, the average rule of thumb is that you adapt one for every hour of travel, time zone travel. It takes a day for your brain and body to adapt. So if you're
Okay.
going to fly 6 hours to a new location for a big event, realize that either you got to go at least 6 days in advance to acclimate to the actual day, or you need to train your body to be closer to that time before you
Before
go
you
there.
go.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
That's another
So
big one that we can do.
which is going to be useful but difficult, right? Because like
Yeah,
you're shifting your time zone and you're not in that time zone yet, and it's like, hey, what are you
that's right.
doing? What are you doing up
Exactly.
at 2 a.m. or what are you,
Right.
why are you
Right.
eating
Exactly.
breakfast at this time?
You need support for these sorts of things. They're hard to do. Either be completely alone or have lots of support.
Right.
Those are the two
Well,
ways to go.
I guess the core with the beginning point with triathlon and Ironman is, yeah, get your buy-in from your family before you do it, because otherwise you're going to have problems. How do we know if we're getting enough sleep, or how do we know if lack of sleep is having a negative effect on our training? How does a triathlete know that, or an athlete in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to know that. I mean, one of the most important ones is, are you recovering the way you normally recover, or the way you'd expect to recover? Are you finding yourself getting sick, like little illnesses a lot? Are you finding that you're making mistakes, that either cognitive mistakes or physical, coordination mistakes? Are you actually depending on caffeine? Are you depending on stimulants to be able to get through a workout? Those are actually questions you need to ask yourself, because it's hard to detect these things. They kind of sneak up on you. They're not, I don't plan to overtrain myself, but it happens slowly. And people get adjusted to being overtrained and think it's normal. One
Yeah.
of the things I like to do with athletes when there's sort of a question about sleep, or they're wondering about their sleep, is get them off cycle. When you're off cycle, when you're not training for a major event, you're just kind of working out for yourself. When you're off that cycle, take some time, like a vacation, in a sense, to find 3 or 4 days where you can just sleep in. You can sleep, what we call sleep in. Do your own schedule the way you naturally would do it. Give yourself the opportunity to sleep when you're tired and wake when you're not, and find out what your sleep need is. Find out what
So
your natural sleep time is.
fall into your default groove.
Exactly. Find out what that is, because I can't tell you what that is. I mean, if I did a saliva test and a blood test, I could, or stuck a rectal probe up your butt, I could find out pretty close what your circadian rhythm is, but I still don't know what your sleep duration need is. So it's a good idea to know that about yourself, because if you know that left to your own devices, you need 8 hours of sleep. That's mine, by the way. I know that I need 8 hours. I feel good with 8 hours. Then if you're training and you're only getting 7 hours, that's not enough. You'll
Right.
know it.
And
You don't change that over time.
like you said, I don't remember the exact phrase you gave, but the metabolic cost or expenditure will
Yeah.
progress. So
Yes.
if you're a billiards player versus like something else, it's going to be a lot lower. Or if you're a triathlete, it's
Yeah.
going to be higher. So
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
if you need 8 hours of sleep without doing exercise or without training heavily,
Guess
once you
what you need
start
when you
going,
are. Yes.
but once you
Exactly.
go into that heavy training, you need more. You need nine
Yeah.
hours or whatever.
And and
How
some
much does LeBron James sleep?
11. And he is somebody that actually is a good spokesman for his sport. And so is Shaq, another person who actually has sleep apnea and uses a CPAP device to treat his sleep problem so that he can perform. There are a lot of sports where it's become no longer a taboo. Football is one of them. Basketball is another one, where sleep itself is actually part of the training program, because big money pays for these
But
things, and also there is money at risk. But for elite non-professional athletes, it's a very different thing, or even professional athletes in what used to be basically amateur sports. It's very difficult to ascribe to basically see this. It's not something that's portrayed. As you said, there's not a lot of folks out there demonstrating this. So we have to speak up. And actually, I started working with the weightlifting team, pretty much a non-professional sport in many ways. Actually, they call themselves the only Olympic garage sport because you train where you can. This is something that I think it's really important to understand, that sleep is not a monolith. It's not just a thing. It actually is a biological process. The three things it breaks down into for your own good to know this is the amount of sleep, duration of sleep, the timing of your sleep, when you sleep, and the quality of your sleep. And if any one of those three is off, your sleep is not good. It doesn't mean just getting more sleep is better. So you could have restless leg syndrome, which is 10% of some populations. You could have sleep disordered breathing, which is even more, like 15, 20% of some populations. These are things like snoring that you shouldn't ignore, because even more sleep with snoring is not good. It can actually cause cardiovascular risk, AFib risk, a number of other risk factors that will be a detriment to you physically and mentally and emotionally. So look at sleep duration as only one part of your sleep need. The other is when you sleep. If your sleep is irregular, something we call social jet lag these days, where people go to bed earlier and get up earlier on the weekdays and then sleep in or go to bed later on the weekends, that's just like traveling time zones every weekend. If you think about it, it's something called social jet lag, and it has a major impact on your body and your brain. And by the way, just because you sleep in on the weekends, you don't make up for that sleep loss during the week. In fact, the impact on your body and brain is there. You don't lose it. It doesn't go away. The impact is there. You feel better, but the physical stress of that sleep deprivation is not fixed by additional sleep on a weekend. It's only going to make you feel better. It's not going to actually make you better. So you really do need to change that, make the regularity, the timing of sleep a big part of your discipline. So
simply adding a few hours of time, of duration, isn't going to make up for the lack of quality that you forgave the other 5 days of the week.
Yeah, or the timing problem. So if you're off your timing, like you're randomly sleeping at times that are not regular, that's another problem that you need to address. So think about your sleep in those three spheres, and then if you can correct your duration and your timing. Those are behavioral. Those are discipline. You can actually find time in a schedule and make those happen. If you're not feeling the benefit of that, it may be because your quality of sleep is not where it needs to be. And that's the hard thing for you to determine. Most of us that aren't medical people can't tell that your quality of sleep is really poor. That's why we do polysomnography, sleep testing, a number of other things that I've done with athletes, the Olympic team and professional teams and other sports. It does give you data about the quality of your sleep. And if there is a sleep disorder, treating it can be a game changer.